everyone. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today to hear Anthony Ray Hinton speak. My name is Deborah Coleman. I am the president of the Black Student Union here at UVU. I am also the presidential intern for People and Culture. I will read a quick bio on Mr. Hinton before we have him on here to share all of his wisdom and everything. Anthony Ray Hinton was released in April 2015 after spending 30 years on Alabama's death row for a crime he did not commit. He was released with the help of Equal Justice Initiative, for which he is now an employee. He now serves as EJI's community educator and travels both nationally and internationally to speak about his experience. One of the longest-serving death row prisoners in Alabama history, and among the longest-serving condemned prisoners to be freed after presenting evidence of innocence. Mr. Hinton is the 152nd person exonerated from death row since 1983. 30 years ago, Mr. Hinton was arrested and charged with 2 capital murders based solely on the assertion that a revolver taken from his mother's home was the gun used in both murders, and in a third uncharged crime. EJI attorneys engaged 3 of the nation's top firearm examiners who testified in 2002 that the revolver could not be matched to crime evidence. State prosecutors never questioned the new findings, but nonetheless refused to re-examine the case or concede error. After 12 more years of litigation, the United States Supreme Court reversed the lower courts and a new trial was granted. The judge finally dismissed the charges after prosecutors said that scientists at the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences tested the evidence and confirmed that the crime bullets cannot be matched to Mr. Hinton's weapon. Anthony Ray Hinton was then released. Now we're going to watch a video on Mr. Hinton.
For 30 years, Anthony Ray Hinton was a dead man walking.
Thank you, Tebow. Thank you, Lord.
Prosecution seemed deemed to take my life from me.
58 years old, Hinton lived more than half his life inside a cage, Holman Correctional Facility in southern Alabama. Today, he's seeing and experiencing things for the first time in decades.
Oh my goodness.
He is welcomed home. A party in his honor, hosted by the Equal Justice Initiative, led by attorney Brian Stevenson and his team of attorneys who fought for decades to win Hinton's freedom.
Thank you for giving me my life back. Just being here as a team, you can say that you got an innocent man off death row.
His nightmare began in 1985. Ronald Reagan was president, Back to the Future was a box office hit, and under the cover of darkness, 2 Birmingham restaurant managers were shot dead at closing time, just months apart. A third victim, another man who survived the shooting and helped identify 29-year-old Anthony Ray Hinton as the killer.
You're a free man now. What does that mean to you?
It means everything. I mean, you never think about your freedom until it's taken away from you. You couldn't put a price tag on it. They got my $12 back already.
So much about the world has changed, but the greatest still is a world without his mother. She died while he was locked away.
It can't get no lower for me. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud of it. That's what's the love of my life.
He goes back to the home they shared together, now abandoned.
Kind of hate to see it in this shape.
It's his first time there since the night it was all taken away. This is the room where Hinton's mother kept her .38 caliber revolver. Police said it was the murder weapon. Hinton's court-appointed public defender hired a supposed ballistics expert to dispute the prosecution's claim about the murder weapon. A persuasive expert, he was not.
So his ballistics expert was blind?
In one eye, yes, that's correct.
He had to ask how to turn on the machine. He couldn't see it. He had to ask, somebody please help me. So when they put him on the stand as my witness, they crucified him. I said, they're gonna find me guilty.
Hinton was sentenced to death. He was ordered to spend the remainder of his life in prison, living inside a 5-by-7 cell.
Pretty much sleep in a fetal position because your feet hang over the bed. You only have a bed that is mounted to the wall and a toilet. And that's what I lived in for 30 years. They took my 30s, my 40, my 50. But what they couldn't take was my joy. I couldn't do a thing about the years, but I could control my joy.
53 inmates were executed at Holman while Hinton was on death row.
My darkest memory would be seeing so many people that I got to know be executed.
He languished in prison for years before his case reached appeals court.
I had never been so convinced of someone's innocence than I had in Mr. Hinton's case. No one asked them.
Judge Subel Cobb was one of those appellate court judges who believed his story.
There was no incriminating evidence. He didn't have anything from the robbery. There were no fingerprints.
This is extremely unusual.
His appeal was denied, but his team kept fighting.
We'd exhausted every state court appeal, and it was the United States Supreme Court that finally intervened.
The result was a new trial the break Hinton had been waiting for. But just a few weeks ago, the state of Alabama dropped the case after a new look at the evidence could not match the bullets to the gun, and Hinton was released.
Since I've been locked up for 30 years and finances is tight, $5 a flight.
I don't sense any bitterness. Why is that?
Bitterness kills the soul. I cannot hate because my Bible teaches me not to hate. I've seen hate at its worst. What would it profit me to hate? I want you to know there is a God. He sit high, but he looks low. He will destroy, but yet he will defend. And he defend me.
I introduce to you the author of The Sun Does Shine, Mr. Anthony Ray Hinton.
First, I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out in your busy schedule to hear a story of injustice. I would like to thank Utah Valley University for inviting me, along with my best friend, Mr. Lester Bailey, who stood by me for 30 years, who visited me 10,999 visits, did not miss a visit in the 30 years that I was there. That is what a friend do for a friend. The story I'm about to tell you, as I think today, Martin Luther King, he once said, was quoted as saying that injustice is a threat to justice everywhere. I am under the process of trying to find out whenever I was given justice. People often ask me, how and what did the state of Alabama find you guilty of? I read your case and I can't understand what it was. And I believe in truth. If nothing today, you may not like the message, but you will be given the truth. You see, the state of Alabama didn't need any evidence. The state of Alabama had the most strongest evidence that one could have in the judicial system in America. You see, I was born black and poor. And although my mother named me Anthony Ray Hinton, the state of Alabama also put on my forehead, black and dangerous. And that's all they needed, the fact that I was born black and poor. I never will forget, on one of the hottest days in Alabama, I don't know how many of you ever been to Alabama, but I'm gonna give you some friendly, free advice. Do not come to Alabama in July. It is far too hot. I woke up that morning like any other morning without a care in the world. And about 10, 11 o'clock, it was already probably 85 degrees. I went outside, and I knew my mother was in the kitchen making some lemonade, and I tried to time it. When she finished making the lemonade, I went in and got a glass, and as I was pouring a glass of lemonade, my mother looked at me and she said, "Are you going to revival?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." For in the South, we say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir, out of pure respect for our elders. And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm going." I got that glass of lemonade and I went on outside, and about 15 minutes later, I brought the glass back into the kitchen, and my mother was still in the kitchen, and she said, "What time do revival start?" I said, 7 o'clock, Mama. And she looked at the old clock on the wall and she said, "Well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass." I dropped my eyes and I looked at my mother and gave her that baby look that had worked so many times in the past. But for some reason, that baby look wasn't working today. And I looked up at my mother and I said, "Mama, I promise you, I will cut that grass tomorrow." My mother looked at me and she said, "I'm trying my best to see how that you'll cut the grass tomorrow out of me telling you to go cut the grass." And finally she looked at me and she said, "Boy, go out there and cut that grass." I goes out and I fire up the old lawnmower, and about 25 minutes into cutting the grass, I just happened to look up. And there stood two white gentlemen that I'd never seen before. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, "Can I help you?" And one of the gentlemen replied, "We're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton." I said, "That would be me. How can I help you?" He said, "We are detectives from the Birmingham Police Department. We have a warrant for your arrest." And I said, "What are the charges?" He said, "We will explain that to you later, but right now, we want you to put your hands behind your back." I complied. I put my hands behind my back. They put the handcuff on me and proceeded to put me in the police car. And I said, "Hold up. At least allow me the opportunity to go in and tell my mother I'm being arrested for something." One of the detectives said, "We cannot allow you to go back inside." We argued for about a minute and two, and finally, the other detective said, "Let him go in and tell his mother he's being arrested." I goes in and I just show my mother the handcuff, and like any good mother, she began to scream and holler, "What are those handcuffs doing on my baby?" And finally, the detective said, "Take him out while I stay in here and talk to his mother." A few minutes later, he comes out and we proceeded to go to the Birmingham County Jail. But on our way there, this detective that wasn't driving asked me, "Anthony, do you own a firearm?" And I said, "No." I said, "My mother has an old Smith & Wesson that she keeps around the house for snakes." Once I revealed that information, they dropped me off at a substation, went back to my mother home and told her that I had told them about a gun that she owned. My mother gave them the gun, and once they got the gun, they came back and they picked me up. And as we proceeded to go to the county jail, I must have asked these detectives at least 50 times, "Why am I being arrested?" They never would say. And as they drove just a little farther, and to be honest with you, I said it a little angrier than I perhaps should have, but I said, "Detective, why am I being arrested?" And this seemed to set the detective off that wasn't driving. He looked at me and he said, "You want to know why we arrested you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "We're going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder." I said, "Oh, you got the wrong person. I haven't done any of that." He looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you something right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but I'm going to make sure that you found guilty of it." I said, "For a crime I didn't commit?" He looked at me and he said, you must have a hearing problem. Didn't I tell you I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it? He said, if you don't remember nothing else, remember I am the one who's going to make sure you're found guilty. And as he drove just a little further, he turned back around and he said, by the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. Would you like to know what they are? And I said, yes. He said, number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, believe me, I do not care. He said, number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. He said, do you know what that spelled? And he repeated the word conviction, 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 conviction. And as we got to the county jail, they placed me in a holding cell, and I had been in there for approximately 2 hours. When the detective came, he opened the door, and I said, Detective, if you don't mind, will you tell me the date and the time this crime took place? He goes in his folder, and he tells me the date. And when he said the date, I said, thank God. And when he said the time, I said, thank you, Jesus. I said, thank you, Jesus, because I know that on that particular day, in that particular time, I was at work. But what I said, thank you, Jesus, for was because my supervisor was white. And I figured once he go out and talk to my white supervisor, he would come back and say, we made a mistake, you're free to go. 5 hours later, he comes back, he opened the cell, and he looks at me. He said, I have good news and bad news. He said, the good news is we no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder. Your alibi checks out. He said, but now we have decided that we're going to charge you with 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. I looked at the detective and I said, but I haven't killed anyone. I said, I could never take another human being's life. And as I was trying to convince this detective that I could never commit a crime like that, he put his hands up as to say, be quiet, let me talk. He looked at me and he said, let me be honest with you. I truly believe you didn't commit the crime. He said, but since y'all, all of y'all is always helping one another, why don't you take this rap for one of your homeboys who truly committed the crime? And with tears rolling down my face, I looked at this detective and I said, Detective, there's not a homeboy in this world that I would take a rap for like this. That detective closed the door. I walked away and he walked away. I sit in that 5x7 for a year and a half. And finally, I go before a judge. A judge tells me what I'm being charged with. He asks me, do I have an attorney? And I tell him no. He asks me, can I afford an attorney? And I tell him no. And he looks back in his courtroom and he calls his lawyer up front and tells the lawyer that he wants him to represent me on 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. Without even asking me my name, the first thing that lawyer said was, I did not go to law school to do pro bono work. At that moment, I looked up at the lawyer and I said, sir, would it make a difference to you if I told you I was innocent? That lawyer now looks at me for the first time and he said, the problem with that statement, all of y'all is always doing something, and the moment you get caught, you cry like you didn't do it. This is the lawyer that I had to believe was going to represent me to the best of his ability. This is the lawyer that I had to somehow try and convince that I was innocent. Well, today, I'm here to tell you that that lawyer did exactly enough to get me found guilty and sentenced to death. I never will forget the day The jury came back and handed the judge a piece of paper. The judge proudly stood up and said, "Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers, and it is the order of this court that I sentence you to death." And that judge had the audacity to say, "May God have mercy on your soul." And after listening to that judge tell me that he prayed that God would have mercy on your soul, the prosecution perhaps said a little louder than he intended to say it. But he could be heard over the courtroom saying these words: "We didn't get the right nigger today, but at least we got a nigger off the street." And I spent 30 years in a 5x7. And when I got to death row, I had made up my mind that I was not going to communicate with no other human being. I was angry. I was heartbroken. You see, because I had bought into this system that the system was fair. I had believed that you don't go to jail unless you had committed some type of crime. But once I got to death row, I was angry. But I wasn't as angry as I was with man as I was with God. I couldn't understand that all of my life my mother had brought me up to believe in God. She said God sit high, but he looks low. God will destroy, but yet he will defend. And I kept wondering why and where was God when I needed him the most. I wanted to know what I had done so bad in life that God would allow me to be tried and convicted for a crime he knew. And I knew that I didn't commit. The only book that they would allow you to have was a Bible. And I took that Bible and I threw it up under the bed. And I said, "God, don't live here anymore." I didn't say I didn't believe in God. I didn't say I didn't love God. I was just angry with God. I couldn't understand how is the God that I truly believe in, the God that I worship, how is it that you can allow me to be found guilty for a crime that I didn't commit? Well, for 3 years, I didn't speak to another human being for 3 years. Whenever the God would come by and I want to ask a question, I would write it out on a piece of paper. Whatever they asked me, I would write my answer out on a piece of paper. And they thought for at least 3 years that I couldn't talk. But then, going into the 4th year, I woke up to the sound of a grown man crying. My mother had taught me compassion. My mother told me no matter what one does in life, they still deserve compassion. And that compassion made me get out of that bunk bed that was too small. And I walked up to the bars and I said, "Sir, do you need me to get the officer back here?" It took this man a while to reply, but finally he replied and said, "No, I just got word my mother passed." And when he told me his mother had passed, I felt nothing but sorrow for this man. I told him, I said, "Well, if I can be of any help to you, please just let me know." I sit on that bunk bed that was too small for me, and I looked up and I said, "Lord, if I am to survive this hell that I'm in now, I need to escape." I knew I could not escape physically, but I knew I could escape mentally. And I closed my eyes as tight as I could close them, and I've always had a love. Let me repeat that. I've always had a love for Queen Elizabeth, not that kind of love. I closed my eyes, and I wanted to go see the Queen. And I closed my eyes as tight as I could, and I imagined being at the palace. Once I arrived at the palace, I told the guard that I was there to see Queen Elizabeth. They goes in and tell the Queen that I'm there. She invite me in. I introduce myself. She tells me, welcome to the palace. We sit down, we talk about Prince Charles, Prince Harry, Prince William, and the tragedy of Prince Di. About 25 minutes into the conversation, the Queen, for whatever reason, stands up, look at me, and she says, Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea? And I tell the Queen I would love some tea. And she said, what would you like in your tea? I tell her a spot of lemon. She had the butler to go out and get this lemon, and they bring it, and I squeeze it in my tea. The Queen and I sips on tea, and we talked some more. Now, about 25 minutes later, I stand up and I tell the Queen, I must be leaving. The Queen looks at me and she says, Mr. Hinton, will you come back? And I tell the Queen I would love to come back. Now that I realize that I can leave death row at any time that I want to, I decided that I would do something next that I said at the age of 12 I would never do. And at the age of 12, I said I would never marry. But I decided I would get married. But I want you to know today, I didn't just marry anybody. I married the beautiful and talented actress, Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married for 15 years up here. And if there's a thing called a perfect wife, Halle Berry was the perfect wife. For she didn't say nothing but, okay, dear, and yes, dear, and whatever you want to do is okay with me, dear. But then going into the 16th year, the warden did something that he had never done for death row. He decided that he would show us a movie, and the movie was called Speed. And for the first time, I lay eyes on Sandra Bullock. And as I watched this lady drive this bus around and around, I'm gonna be honest with Utah today. To be honest with you, I wasn't gathering my thoughts. I was trying to build my nerves up to give Halle some sad news. Finally, when I built my nerves up, I looked at Halle and I said, Halle, I'm going to divorce you, and I'm gonna marry Sandra Bullock. And true to her word, she just said, okay, dear. And by that time, a God called me. He said, Anthony, I've been trying to get your attention for over 15 minutes. I said, I'm sorry, I was gone. What is it? He said, you have a legal visit. I said, but I don't have an attorney. The state of Alabama do not give you an attorney during post-conviction. He said, well, Anthony, somebody is out there pretending to be a lawyer then. Get dressed and go see who it is. I goes out there, and there's this lawyer from Boston, and I asked this lawyer, who sent him from Boston to represent me in Alabama? He tells me a man by the name of Brian Stevenson, and I reply, who is Brian Stevenson? He tells me how great this Brian Stevenson is. And I looked at this lawyer, and I said, Brian Stevenson cannot be that great. For Brian Stevenson have already made one fundamental mistake. And the lawyer looks at me and he said, what is the mistake? I said, let me make sure I got you correct. You did say you are from Boston, right? He said, yes. I said, well, see, had Brian Stevenson checked with me before he sent you here, Brian Stevenson would have known that I am a beloved Yankee fan. And there's no way a Yankee fan and a Boston fan could ever do anything together. I said, but for your sake, I'm willing to put my personal feeling aside and let you work on my case. You see, I believe even in the midst of trouble, even in the midst of being on death row, laughter is great for the soul. I believe that laughter is the best medicine anyone could ever take. And although I wanted this lawyer to know that I had a sense of humor, and although I was facing a death sentence, I wanted him to know who I really was. And I looked at this lawyer and I said, I need a lawyer who believes in me. I need a lawyer who is willing to go to jail for me. This lawyer for the next 3 years would come back every year and tell me what he had found out. And in the 4th year, this lawyer told me that he believed he can get me a life without parole. And I looked at this lawyer and I said, life without parole is for guilty people, not innocent people. I said, you asking me to stand up and plead guilty to something that I didn't do? I could never do that. I said, all of my life, my mother have instilled in me to tell the truth. She told me no matter what the consequences would be, always tell the truth. I say, I understand that the state of Alabama is trying to execute me for a crime I didn't commit. You trying to save my life by getting me a life without parole. I said, but in one instinct, you saving my life, but on the same hand, you is taking my life. I said, I appreciate you trying to save my life, but I realized something that I would prefer to be executed than to tell a lie. I said, all of us at some point and some time in life, we will die. I'm not ready to die, and I don't want to die for a crime I didn't commit, but I could never stand up and plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit. I said, in the state of Alabama is hell-bent on executing me for a crime they know that I didn't commit, so be it. I said, I can't worry about anything that I don't have the power to worry about. I looked at the lawyer and I said, I told you I need a lawyer that believes in me. I told you that I need a lawyer that was willing to go to jail for me if necessary. I said, the fact that you're trying to get me a life without parole tells me you don't believe in me, and therefore I have no choice but to fire you. The lawyer looks at me and he said, are you serious? I said, yes. I said, I want to thank you for what you was trying to do. I want to thank you for what you did do, but I just cannot stand up and tell a lie. I said, and believe me, the truth have gotten me in a lot of trouble. But yet I stood firm and I told the truth. And I said, today, I no longer will be needing your service. And as he was going out the front door, they were taking me back toward the cell. Something in my mind said, you got to be the dumbest person in the world. For you fired the only lawyer that you had. But just as that thought entered my mind, another thought came and said, you did the right thing. Always stand up for what you believe in. And as I got back toward the cell, a guard was watching TV, and I asked him what was he watching. He was watching a lawyer out of Montgomery, Alabama, a man by the name of Brian Stevenson. And I said, do you mind if I stand here and listen? And he gave me permission to listen. And Brian Stevenson was talking about why we don't need a death penalty in this country. And as I listened to Brian Stevenson, I knew at that moment, this is the lawyer that I need to represent me. So I goes in that cell and I write Brian Stevenson a letter. I thank him for the lawyer from Boston. I just tell him it didn't work out. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, I would like to ask you, would you consider being my lawyer? I said, if you can't, I understand. All I ask before you say yes or no is that you read my transcript. And once you read my transcript, if you find one thing in my transcript that point to my guilt, do not send me another lawyer. Do not become my lawyer. I am perfectly willing to die for a crime I didn't commit. Mr. Stevenson read my transcript, sent me a letter that he would be reading it. 6 months later, he read it, and he sent me a letter saying that he would be coming to see me. The moment I shook this man's hand, I knew that God had sent me his #1 lawyer. And as we sit there and talked about our childhood, I finally looked at Mr. Stevenson and I said, Mr. Stevenson, if no two guns is alike, I already know that the state of Alabama is telling a lie. The gun that they got from my mother home have not been fired in over 25 years. That I know for a fact. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to do me a favor. And Mr. Stevenson looked at me and he said, what is the favor? I said, I need you to hire a ballistic expert. Mr. Stevenson looked at me and he said, well, I was going to do that anyway. And I looked at Mr. Stevenson and I said, Mr. Stevenson, I'm not explaining myself right. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to hire a white man. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need this white man to be from the South. I need this white man to be the best of the best. I need this white man to just tell the truth. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, if it's possible, I need this white man to believe in the death penalty. Mr. Stevenson looked at me and he said, why do he have to be white? And why do he have to be from the South? I said, Mr. Stevenson, I've lived in the South all of my life, and the South will only recognize one of their own. I said, Mr. Stevenson, you can go out and get the best white female in the country. Her word is no good on the witness stand in Alabama. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, it definitely cannot be a person of color, for their word is definitely no good on the witness stand. It have to be a white Southern male. I looked at Mr. Stevenson and I said, what kind of world are we living in that even when you're fighting for your life, it seems race must play a part in who I can get to come up here and tell the truth? I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to make sure that this white man just tell the truth. Let him know that my life depends on him telling the truth. Mr. Stevenson left that day, and about 6 months later, he informed me that he found 3 of the world-renowned experts. 2 of them live in Texas, and 1 of them lived in Virginia. He assured me that these 3 experts was the best in the country. And I remember asking Mr. Stevenson, did you ask them would they just tell the truth? And Mr. Stevenson said they all have assured me that they would tell exactly what the evidence shows. If the evidence is for you, they would say it. if the evidence is against you, they will say it. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, if you can't afford it, hire those 3 experts. He hired those 3 experts that came to Alabama one at a time, and they did their testing, and when they all had done their testing for the first time, they got together. And they said the bullets did not even come close to being a match. I knew, the state of Alabama knew, that they had every intention of taking my life for a crime that I hadn't committed. We goes before the Attorney General, present this evidence, a man by the name of Bill Pryor. And Bill Pryor was quoted as saying, as far as he was concerned, the right man was on death row, and it would be a waste of the taxpayer money. It would be a waste of time to re-examine the bullets. And for not doing his job, George W. Bush appointed him to a federal lifetime appointment. I goes before 2 more attorney generals in Alabama, and they too refused to re-examine the bullets. And I began to wonder, did they not examine the bullets because of the color of my skin, or is it because they already knew that the bullets never did match? I sit on Alabama death row an extra 16 years because the state of Alabama was not willing to tell the truth. And in that 16 years, I got the worst news that I could ever get. And that news was my mom had passed. I told Mr. Stevenson, when I found out that my mother had passed, I told him I didn't give a damn about that case. Far as I'm concerned, the state of Alabama can execute me right now. I didn't see a world without my mother. And I began to imagine what would my mother say to me. And I could just hear my mother telling me that she didn't bring me up to be a quitter. She brought me up to fight, and she wanted me to fight. And that next morning, I called Mr. Stevenson, and I told him I wanted him to give the state of Alabama all the hell that he could give them. We fought the state. The state refused to overturn my conviction, and finally, we filed my case to the United States Supreme Court. 2 years after filing my case to the United States Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court did something that it have never done in the history of the courts. All 9 justices ruled in my favor that I was entitled to a new trial. They send the trial back to Alabama. We go before the trial judge. The prosecution walk in and say, Your Honor, it is with great sadness that I inform you that we cannot find the gun to this case. The judge give them 60 days to find the gun. While, again, I'm still living or existing in a 5x7. 60 days come, we go before the judge, and the prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with great satisfaction that I inform you that we found the gun. But, Your Honor, it is once again with deep regret that I inform you that we cannot find the bullets to the gun. She gave them 60 more days, and while we thought that the prosecution was looking for the bullets, we realized that the prosecution had called one of his old experts to examine the bullets one last time. He came and he examined the bullets, and he was quoted in the Birmingham News as saying, the bullets do not match the way they matched 30 years ago. But the bullets match exactly the way they did 30 years ago. Bullets are like fingerprint. They wasn't going to change. They didn't match 30 years ago. They wasn't going to match 30 years later. The only difference is that God has sent me a lawyer that the state of Alabama knew was going to fight them with everything he had. I sit in a cage for 30 years. And finally, on April the 3rd, 2015, for the first time in 30 years, I will let go. I want you to notice I didn't say I was free, because I will never be free again until the day I die. You see, no one in here knows of the hell that I went through, because the state of Alabama knew that I didn't have the money to hire a decent defense. We have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty, opposed to if you're poor and innocent. We have a system that wants you to believe that we are dealing with mass incarceration, but we are not dealing with mass incarceration. We are dealing with a new form of slavery. And I am the only one who have the guts to stand up and say that we're dealing with a new form of slavery. The system will have you to believe that the system is broken. I come here today to tell you that the system is not broken. The system is working exactly the way it was designed to work. The system was designed to put men of color back into slavery. But for those of you who want to believe that the system is broken, believe that. I come here with no agenda. I didn't come here as a Democrat. I didn't come as an independent. I didn't come as a Republican. I came as a truth teller. We have a problem in this country, and yet no one wants to face it. But I stand here today to ask you, what if I had been your brother? What if I had been your father? What if I had been your grandfather? What if I had been someone you cared about? Would you still believe in a system that is designed to put men of color? You see, in the state of Alabama, it costs $2 million to execute a man. And yet that state in Alabama is one of the poorest states in America. But yet we can find the money to execute human beings. But yet we cannot find the money to give our teacher a decent raise. We cannot find the money to give our social worker the money to do the things that they need to do. We cannot find the money to do and give our firefighters the best equipment that money can buy. We cannot hire enough police to put on the streets. And you've been brainwashed to believe that the death penalty is a deterrent in crime. According to the FBI statistics, states who do not have the death penalty, murder rate is far less than states that do have the death penalty. And ask yourself, what do we gain when we execute someone? Ask yourself, do we deserve to be in the killing business? And ask yourself, how many men and women have we already executed that was innocent? You see, since I've been home, I came out as the 152nd exoneree. Since I've been home, it is up now to 165. I need to ask you, how many men and women need to be exonerated before you say we don't need a death penalty. I'm sure everyone in here perhaps have flew a plane or something, rode on a plane, and if 165 plane had fell out the sky from here time after time, how many of you would still ride that airplane? You see, the problem I have is I don't believe we care enough to make changes. But I came here today because I believe in the young people in this country. I believe that the young people hold the key to solving racism. I believe that the young people in this country holds the key to making injustice justice for every man, every woman, and every child. And I believe in you that I want to apologize to the young people for my generation not having the backbone to make it better for you. For I truly believe that every generation should leave it easier for another generation. I've been home 8 years, and no one have had the decency to say, Mr. Hinton, I'm sorry. No one have had the decency to say, Mr. Hinton, here's $1 to help you try and regain your life. Yes, the state of Alabama kept me in a cage for 30 years, but the state of Alabama have not given me 1 penny. The state of Alabama have not even apologized from the governor to a senator, but it's okay with me. You see, I forgave the men and women that got together to do this to me a long time ago. For I truly believe in forgiveness. In order for me to be able to stand here, I knew I could not have any hatred for those that got together and tried to take my life. You see, I believe that I wanted to be free inside. In order for me to be free inside, I cannot walk around with hatred. You see, since I've been home, I've been blessed with a lot of beautiful things. And I've had the pleasure to travel abroad. I came out and I didn't ask anyone to give me anything. All I ask is that you give me the opportunity. And I sit down by the grace of God by pure memories and wrote the second best book that ever been written. The Bible being number one. Never could do what that Bible tells you to do. But that book, in my honest opinion, that is a book that if you read, you're going to call somebody and say, hey, go and buy this book. I want to share one story and then I'm going to close. In that book, I talk about a young man who was a Ku Klux Klansman. His name was Henry Francis Hayes. Henry Francis Hayes was brought up in Alabama by his father, who was the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And his father gave him an order to go out and kill the first African-American male he came across. His father was angry because a jury had found a black man not guilty for killing a police officer. And he was angry. And he gave his son an order along with 2 other clans to go out and kill the first African-American male they came across. And they came across a 19-year-old mentally retarded black male. They befriended him, got him to get in the car, and they stabbed him 65 times. And after stabbing him 65 times, this didn't satisfy Henry. Henry got out and got a rope and threw the rope over the power line and hung him in the middle of the street. But that didn't satisfy Henry either. Henry took out his pocket knife and cut off the black male's genitals. And that seemed to satisfy Henry. And then we live the lie in America. We love to lie and we love to say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm here today to ask you, where was that village when this boy was being taught to hate? Where was that village when he went to school and they was teaching him hate instead of teaching him his ABC? Yes, we say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, that village didn't come to light until they apprehended Henry, tried Henry, and that village found him guilty and said, this would be a better world if you wasn't in it. Henry came to death row. Henry and I began to talk every day. And for 15 years, I tried to show Henry that I am nothing the way that his father, his community, and his neighbor had told him I was. I said, Henry, I want you to be who you are. I want you to use the word that you want to use. And I said, Henry, allow me to show you that I'm nothing like your father told you I was. And in the course of those 15 years, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Henry's mother came to death row to see him, and she died right there of a mass heart attack. We rallied around Henry and told him how sorry he was for his loss. 3 months later, his father came to death row, and he too died of a mass heart attack. I looked at Henry and I said, Henry, it's like God told your parents, since you commanded your son to go out and commit this horrible crime, it is only fitting that you die on death row as well. And Henry looked at me and he said, you really believe that, Ray? I said, Henry, I do. I said, think about it. No one have come here and died other than your parents. I said, that must mean something. Well, the state of Alabama sent Henry an execution date about 2 years later. All of Henry's family had died out. And Henry wrote the warden and asked the warden, could I be with him on the day of his execution? The warden granted him his request. He just said I couldn't be there during the execution, which I never would have been. But that day I wanted to make Henry laugh. I wanted Henry to laugh and not think that this is the last day that I'm going to live. And I would love to believe that I did a fantastic job in making Henry laugh all day long. And finally, about 9:30, they brought Henry his last meal. And when they took the lid off, it was a 6-ounce steak. I looked at Henry and I said, Henry, that's all you want for your last meal? He said, yeah. I said, well, you ready to die? He looked at me and he said, Ray, can I ask you something? I said, yeah, Henry, ask me. He said, if it ever become your time, what is it that you gonna want? I said, Henry, I gave that a lot of thought. What I want, they're gonna have to go to the forest and get it. And when they bring it back from the forest, I'm gonna say, that ain't what I told y'all I want. You got to go back to the forest. I said, Henry, every time they bring me something, if there's a law that says they can't execute me till I eat my last meal, I said, I'm gonna be here forever. Because no matter what they bring, it ain't what I want. And Henry looked at me and he said, Ray, only you would think of something like that. He finally ate his 6-ounce steak and they got him exactly at 11:30. For the first time, we was allowed to embrace one another. I hugged him and I told him that I loved him. I told him, Henry, I truly believe that you and I will see each other again one day. I said, Henry, I could only imagine if you and I could have met before now. We were able to talk to each other as brothers. I could only imagine what we could have did. I said, but Henry, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I want you to know that I truly believe that you and I will see each other again. Henry looked at me and he said, Ray, I haven't always felt the way I feel, but I want you to know I thank you for being there for me. I want you to know that I love you and I appreciate everything you and my brothers on death row did for me. We embraced one time again, and they took him. When they put him in the electric chair, they asked him, did he have any final words? And Henry was quoted as saying, all of my life, I was taught to hate. All of my life, my mother, my father, my community taught me nothing but hate. And the very people that they taught me to hate for the last 15 years have shown me nothing but love. And tonight, as I leave this world now knowing what real love feels like. I tell you that story because I see the hatred in this country. And whether you believe it or not, the houses that you own, the cars that you drive, it's only yours temporary. You're going to leave all of that here. God have blessed you to have certain things, and you should enjoy them. But you should never put materialistic things before another human being. I truly believe that we have so much in common, but we are afraid to have a conversation. I believe that America needs an open and honest conversation about race. Thank you so much for listening to my story. We're going to have time for only 2 questions. And I must tell you before you come up here with those 2 questions, I charge $20 per question. And you give it to that man over there in the black. So if you got a question, please come up to the mic. I only have time for 2.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was powerful and fantastic to hear. Parts of it were soul crushing and definitely places where it's easy to see where you can lose faith in humanity. After your release, what was the greatest thing that brought back your faith in humanity?
In who?
In humanity.
If I have to really be honest, I didn't lose faith in humanity. I always understood from a little boy, from the teaching of my mother, there will always be some people who just won't like me regardless. And I was brought up to believe that I am responsible for how I treat you. I'm not responsible for how you treat me. Humanity never did leave me because my best friend showed me humanity my whole life. He didn't stop loving me, didn't stop caring about me. Lawyers, so when you ask that question, it's kind of difficult for me. I stopped believing and stopped having faith in people that are of authority. You see, I come from a humble beginning. I was brought up to believe in authority. I was brought up to believe that police officers, judges, or lawyers, or whatever of authority was not there to harm you. But I realized that was a lie. And so now, it's not that I don't have trust for police officers. I just don't interact and try to get to know them as I once did. Let me be the first one to say this. I live in perhaps, if not the, but one of the racist states in America. But I promise you, I want you to know that in that racist state is some of the best white people you could ever meet. I didn't get here because it wasn't. We celebrating Martin Luther King. The civil rights movement would not have gotten to where it was had it not been for those decent white people that stood behind and gave money but was afraid to come up. And the difference that I see now is that these young people is willing to stand up. And so humanity, I couldn't live without. I always believe that there are some good people in this world. We just in America believe showing the bad ones. We never report good stories. We always want to get the publicity and show the bad story. We don't show little Johnny saving a cat that is drowning. That's not good television. But we definitely will show little Johnny killing the cat, because in the end, all of us gonna get upset about it. And so humanity, I will always believe that there's humanity in every person, even if they bad. I believe we choose to do that. And so thank you. Oh, I ain't seen you give him that $20 yet. Anybody else? One more. That's it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton, for coming all the way out here. My name is Jerome Corelli. I'm the program director for the African Diaspora Initiative and MLK chair. I'm gonna keep it brief because there's no way to follow that out. If you all wanna contribute to the African Diaspora Initiative scholarship, they told me I need to do a little bit more this time to big it up. That money that goes to donations is gonna go directly to our student scholarships. And so it would help our students, primarily of the African diaspora, be successful and reach completion in their college degrees. Directly after this, we're going to head over to center stage for where Ray Hinton is going to be signing his books. And we have copies over there as well, free copies. So you all can feel free to exit, take a left, and head there. And at 2 o'clock, upstairs, SC 206, we'll have breakout sessions. Thank you, everybody.